I have a quick question. Do you vote before or after the meeting?
So we will talk about that. You will get an email.
I got the email.
And you can vote anytime you want as long as it's before 9:30 p.m.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna give it like 2 more minutes to make sure we've let everybody in who wants to join. Well, we'll still let people in, but that way we won't have the flood.
Laura, while you're sitting there, do you mind sending me what you're gonna send me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes.
So that I can finish? Thank you.
All right, it is 6:40. I am going to call us to order. I want to make sure that we, sorry, it's been a long day. I want to make sure I recognize the board members I have on the call. My name is Ebony Rose Thompson. I'm the chair of the Ward 7 Education Council. And I see Nzinga, Marla, Laura, Maxine. I don't know if you want to unmute yourselves or not.
Hi, everyone. Maxine Elbert, special education teacher, HD Woodson, parliamentarian. Welcome.
Okay, well, I'll follow then. Hi, I'm Marla Dean. I am CEO of Bright Beginnings, a nonprofit here in Washington, DC, dedicated to supporting children and families who are experiencing housing insecurity. And I am the legislative chair.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nzinga Tall. I'm the corresponding secretary.
Laura Fuchs, I'm the recording secretary. I teach at HD Woodson.
Okay, great. So a couple of housekeeping, we always start with housekeeping things first so that people know. So typically, as most of you know, we do elections in person, but it's still COVID. So we're not doing that this year. We are doing virtual elections. So this is the first for us. Anyone who registered, so we had a cutoff at 12 o'clock just to make sure we could get all the emails in and accommodate anyone. So anyone who registered should have received the email at 6:35. The voting window stays open until 9:30 p.m. In that email is three things. So one is the ballot. And so when you do not have to be in the meeting technically to vote, because there are some people who probably received the ballot and aren't in the meeting yet. But one is the ballot. Two is there's a link to the candidate statements in that ballot, along with the ballot. And three is actually the information for this meeting. So that way, if it's helpful for people to get one email, that's a good thing. So we might have some people, we have a couple more people trickling in. So you can vote anytime during the meeting, because typically our meeting would be in person and we would have a 2-hour voting window. We gave an additional hour in case you are sitting in the meeting, get caught up in the excellent conversation we're having today, forget to vote. And then I can say at the end of the meeting, make sure you go vote. You have an additional hour. Voting will end at 9:30 because that's when it's set to end. And then we will see the results. You will get an email with what the results are. And we will also send it to our listserv and put it on the social media. So people know, typically we have a third party, which is a community organization, run our elections. So in the past, that's been everybody from Ward 7 Dems, DCPA has run the elections. For us this year, Election Buddy counts as the third party. That's something we brought to the body. It was the best way to do it, to be kind of fair and, transparent and all the things you will want an election to be. Thanks to everybody who figured out how to get that done. And good luck to all the candidates. It's my first time not being a candidate, so that's a little weird, but I'm excited for who the next board will be. And I want to thank everybody who's on the board now, because you all have been awesome and you'll continue to be awesome. And I get to just be a member. I guess I'm technically a member of the exec board with the state board position, but I will no longer be the chair, and I'm totally okay with that because we have some wonderful people running. So I will stop there. If there are questions about any of the election stuff or anything I said was not clear, please let me know, because I want to make sure that, this is the first time we're doing this, so people have all the information that they need. Any questions? Going once? Going twice? All right, I'm going to close questions on that. I want to make sure that we share our meeting minutes per usual, which is our next housekeeping item, and then we'll start talking about budget. Oh, look at Laura with the draft.
Trying something new. If it does not work, let me know, because I'm using Google Drive and that's not necessarily what I usually use. So there should be a Word doc shared with that link. That's the draft minutes from March general body meeting. And I guess if you don't mind reviewing those for a few minutes, I know they're long, but if there's any issues that stand out, I can, cool. I can make any edits as needed.
Can I ask a silly question? It may not be silly, but I saw it in the chat, and my husband told me to ask. It was put in the Greater Ward 7 Facebook group. Someone said, "Is the Ward 7 Education Council a nonprofit?" I just thought I should ask because my husband was like, "So am I going to get to write off what I paid? Do we get a write off?" We were just curious.
That's a great question. So so there's a two-part answer to that. So the Ward 7 Education Council, when it first was established, was a nonprofit, but it did different work. So it didn't do any advocacy work. We currently are registered with DCRA as a community organization, and we have established fiscal agreements when we need to do donations and that type of stuff. So no, we're not a national nonprofit at this point with the IRS, because nonprofits shouldn't do a lot of what we do. We would be in trouble for we'd be in trouble for that. So I would not advise him to write it off because that's not how we're structured.
Okay, I was just curious and I wanted to ask. It was more one of those thought process questions, but thank you.
Other questions? And Laura, thank you for the new way of the minutes. I like it. This gives people reading time.
Rather than me scrolling through 3 pages of documents on the Zoom screen.
I'll also use this opportunity if people have any questions about the minutes, questions or corrections. Going once. Going twice. All right, hearing none. I'm going to see if there is a motion to adopt the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. And all in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye. Or give me a.
Oops, sorry.
Burnice, is that a question? Raise hand.
Oh, I was
is that
raising
an
my
aye?
hand too, as an aye, sorry.
Right, just making sure. I want to make sure we're on the same
No
page.
problem.
Any abstentions? You can give me a nay or a thumbs down. All right, any abstentions? Motion carries. We will move on. I want to make sure that we kind of just dig into our panel. So people know, typically every year, we have a bunch of conversations about budget. It's something we care very much about because it's the way our schools get resourced. So we have a couple things on the table. So one is I'm going to share in the chat, and I'll probably share it a couple times because I know the chat will probably get a little cumbersome. There's a petition that the Ed Council has signed on to, asking the council to make sure the requisite resources are there to fully fund our schools. So I'll share that in the chat. We want to make sure that people know how to participate in the discussion. It is super helpful to us if people use the chat because it helps me keep a queue. And it also helps us if there are things we need to follow up on. So I want to make sure that I recognize the panelists. So Bernice Cain is here. She's from Houston's PTA. I believe, Nzinga, you have to tell me who's here from Duke Ellington. And Maxine, you have to tell me who's here from HD Woodson.
I don't think our Ellington rep is here yet.
Okay, Maxine, who's here from HD? Or is it you? Because I was trying to make it you.
No, it was supposed to be Miss Thompson-Meyers. She's not here yet. Let me text her, make sure it's, and
All right.
see. If she doesn't show up.
We have 2 Woodson teachers, so we're always covered. So I want to, I guess we'll start with Ms. Cain and just kind of giving an overview of like Houston, like what they're seeing. So what they're seeing on their budget and like we'll start there, what they're seeing with their budget.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you all. And in terms of the budget, we were able to petition for an additional $40,000. In general, we looked at trying to have all our staff needs met, as well as if we ever go back to in-person, which I know is now what we're leaning towards, being able to support after and before and after care, and then just extracurricular support activities for our students and or supplemental learning activities. Our biggest concern was trying to secure a vice principal. And we were able to do that. Of course, none of the funds have been dispersed, but the preliminary budget had been approved. There was a difference in terms of, I want to say $40,000 between having an assistant principal to support our new principal who's in office now versus having a different teaching position. So it was a very fair and balanced process, being a part about our LSAT team. And it was challenging to kind of weigh the needs of the school in terms of what resources were available, what staff was available, and then kind of predict what enrollment rates would be, right? So that's the other challenge, knowing that enrollment is tied into funding. So Representative Thompson was dynamic in helping me kind of articulate that argument with the parties that be on a Dean Wood Civic Association call. And again, I'm hoping to hear more about how we can advocate for not only my school community, but the others in the entire District of Columbia public school system to be able to get the resources that are necessary to kind of navigate not only through COVID, but going forward and supporting our school needs.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that background. Maxine, since Ms. Thompson hasn't joined us, do you want to kind of give us an overview of what Woodson is seeing?
Sure, I can. I just sent her the link, but of course I can. So, with Woodson, we had and Laura can correct me if, incorrect. Try to be diplomatic about the situation. So we did lose about $500,000, I think it was. We lost a substantial amount. Our goal was to try to make sure that we didn't lose positions that actually worked directly with students. So that was our goal of what we wanted to do. However, admin wanted to we're really administratively heavy. So it was a real struggle because the administration wanted to keep some positions that don't work directly with students. So we worked that out, made some compromises where we could. We asked for some things that we actually got, but other things we didn't. It wasn't extremely as bad as we thought that it would be, but we were able to, keep all of our teaching staff. That was our biggest thing. We couldn't get anything else, with what we had, it's pretty tight. So I think that's it. Did I leave anything out, Laura?
No.
Okay, great.
For both, well, I guess anyone can answer, Maxine, Laura, or Burnice. Do you all have a sense of what, if it was because if you had lower enrollment, or what the rationale was with the change in your budget this year?
I definitely can speak to that. I agree that enrollment was a factor, as well as resources and allocation of resources, and then needs, like whether or not certain staff members were coming back, whether or not certain staff members retired, or, I think another need too was just trying to assess what was going to be the technology need as well as how are we going to implement the resources that we already had. But definitely enrollment was a big conversation, and trying to see that the schools were going to get the same type of budgetary needs as if we were in person versus virtual was a part of the conversation at my school.
Just to add on to that, enrollment was certainly the excuse that was given. It always is. But I think as pointed out in a previous meeting, the amount of money we lost for the amount of students that we were projected to be down seemed a little disproportionate. But also just, in a decade of working at Woodson, well, over a decade of being on the LSAT, it's time and again, it just fluctuates. And it's kind of a black box of information that DCPS keeps close to the chest. And then sometimes principals keep close to the chest so they can justify the decisions they want to make. Though I know no principal wants to make a cut. So like they might be keeping that so that they can justify the tough decisions they have to make. But I think there's really just a lack of transparency that allows for a lot of games to be played. And they can just say, oh, it's programming. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. And there's like almost no way for us to figure out if that's true. And honestly, like, it just feels like 9 times out of 10, it's not true. But we're just kind of left in the lurch. We ask the council, we ask someone else to like try and like verify if what we're being told is accurate, and nobody can. And then by the time we get some type of verification or DCPS offers up some lame excuse, it's May and it's too late and the council does what it does. So it's like, you know, it's just very consistent. So like this cut is consistent with all the cuts that we've pretty much experienced over the years with like 2 exceptions.
Right. Go ahead, Miss Thompson-Meyers. She just showed up. I don't know if she wanted to add anything or what have you, but that's exactly correct with what Laura said. I thought going into it that at least they would fully fund the schools for what we had currently because of what, you know, everything that we went through with the pandemic and all this SEL they keep discussing, but people are still losing their jobs, and that is going to affect students.
So I have a follow-up question, and this will be the last question I asked before I kind of open it up a little bit more, because I want it to be a conversation. And I'm going to lean on Allyson a little bit because I know she's a parent at Bears and she's always willing to share. So I know one of the conversations that is happening in public, at least, is around more funding coming, federal funding coming. But that will actually be a separate process from the budget process. What are some of the things you would hope for or would be useful to your schools as far as those resources and funding? How would you like them to be spent? And anyone can start.
Well, this is Burnice again speaking. I'm just thinking about it cognitively. And I think the first thing would be, you know, being able to have the staff in place to be able to teach the students, right? That's number one. And I think the other thing is too, how are we allocating technology and the resources that we do have? I think that's kind of the other conversation. And that's kind of difficult to navigate because there are just so many moving parts, I would imagine at this point, between the staff needs, between what's happening with our community and COVID and the vaccinations, and then of course, just what the students are able to do and are not able to do, because the summer school conversation has to be had too, and catching up. So those are my 3 salient points to add.
I think that this is Maxine again. I think that something has to be done about special education, or those students that receive special education services. Because I just found during the pandemic, not just I'm gonna say on the high school level, I'm not sure about, you know, everywhere else, but on a high school level, a lot of those students have kind of slipped through the cracks. Some of those students is going to be hard to get them back, and we really need to focus some type of effort into making sure that that vulnerable population per se has true resources that are not just on paper per se.
So good evening, everyone. This is Mrs. Myers from Woodson Senior High School. So with definitely those funds that can be asked for, can be used, definitely, I would love to see it going into programming for students as far as remediation, definitely within reading, definitely within math, making sure that schools are fully funded in those core areas to get the best and the most that we're going to need from our students. I know we're with this Fresh Start initiative that we're doing for the schools, but we need to figure out, whether or not those students are going to come to these Fresh Start Initiative academies that we're going to have, and even the summer school options with, just of everything, dealing with COVID and students, with excuses here, real life situations here and there. We just need to make sure that our schools have the resources that are available to them to make the best for them, and also dealing with SEL as well. So just making sure that as well, that whatever it is that we're spending, it's student centered and not just, like maybe fluff.
Allyson, I know you kind of volunteered in the chat. I want to make sure you have a chance to share a little bit about what Beers is looking at and kind of answer the same question.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Allyson Criner-Brown, and yeah, I'm the parent of a first grader at Beers, and I am on the LSAT and the reopening committee. And I didn't look at our numbers before this meeting because I wasn't necessarily planning to speak, but from our LSAT meetings, I can say it was a really interesting picture for us because we were projected to be 30 students less than our projection for this year, which is basically like what our attendance is right now. So we were projected for 580 this year. We're at 550. I'm just rounding. And then next year they're projecting us for 550. So year to year comparison went down 30 students, but our budget amount actually went significantly higher, which I was just scratching my head about. But then when it all whittled down, we still had to cut a staff position because we still didn't have enough money to maintain the staff as it had been. So we didn't want to lose anyone, and we had to lose one of our support staff that helps on SEL support, and it was one of our Black male staff members. And so our admin has been very open about saying like they don't want to lose anyone right now, and they want to they welcome more hands on deck because we really are anticipating that there's just going to be unanticipated student needs. So yeah, the story for us is lower projection, higher budget. Either way, it's still cutting a staff position.
And Allyson, what would you like to see if there was, as there is additional money coming? What do you think would be the best use of those funds?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is that they're saying it can't be used for staff when it's like, well, if we're going to do more, then who's going to do the more? How are we going to add a lot of things without adding people to support? And, and why would we, try to bring in people like contractors or so on and so forth from outside the community when we could use the staff that we have that already know us and, are certified teachers and such. So, yeah, I mean, we should be able to use it, especially if it is not only restricted to 1 year, which I feel like I've seen some things from Fiscal Policy Institute that said we have like 2 to 3 years to spend that, not just the 1 year. So yes, more direct supports, especially for things like the librarians. Like we shouldn't be losing librarians in positions. Why would we talk about high dosage tutoring and we're cutting librarians? Like, it doesn't add up. So definitely on the staffing side. And yeah, I mean, we've never been able to have before care because we could never afford it if we wanted to. So like before care would be something we'd probably add. We might make some improvements like to our school garden. Maybe that could expand a partnership. I don't know, but there's definitely a desire for staff, but it's kind of hard to envision what exactly will we get with the money that's doesn't come with extra people.
Thank you. So I wanted to open it up, and we don't have a huge group tonight, so we can make it a little bit more of a make it more conversational. So we welcome questions and comments. We just wanted to kind of get the conversation started with some people who were willing to share. I see Ms. Stamper and I see Mr. Thompson. And then I'm gonna do my due diligence and check the chat to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Good evening. So I'm at minor. I'm in Ward 6. However, I'm a paraprofessional who's trying to actually fully get certified. And every time I go up I've interviewed for positions several times since I've been at this school. And what I'm seeing is a history, to speak to what Ms. Cain was saying. Basically, what happens is the personnel committee could pick their person and say, hey, I want this person, and go through the whole process. But then when you get to the end, and the principal can be like, nope, I want this person. But then it becomes an issue if, say, with data, then you look back 3-4 years later after this person has been hired and you weren't, and you're like, yo, this is compromising data. You lied, but I guess I wasn't. The reason that you didn't pick me is because you will lie. You will do whatever it is to do to get the money or whatever funding to prove that we need it. So with that being said, principals really, there's no real checks and balances. All they have to do is say, oh, and send a email or whatever to the LSAT or to the staff or personnel committee to validate why, and then downtown approves it and it's pushed through the council. And then the community members are left looking like with their hands out their pocket. And it's what Ms. Criner-Brown was saying. Paraprofessionals, basically, it seems like they're trying to get rid of us. Here's why. Or they're trying to push us out or push us into other teaching programs. I saw some ads on different job listing sites where it's hiring paraprofessionals. You get basically $25 an hour for next school year and no benefits. So this is the way they're trying to recruit and get rid of the paraprofessionals, because we were on March 3rd, we had emergency legislation, March 3rd, 2020, go through the council. We were supposed to get a bigger pay raise on top, but it got frozen. Now they're hiring all these extra people. It's like, well, you just told us you didn't have any money. So how are you going to sit here and say you don't have money, but then you paying other people, but just not giving them benefits? So I just want to put that out there. I know that may not, I work at a Ward 6 school. However, every school budget process is the same, because if you're a DCPS school, so just to make everyone aware of that.
I appreciate that. Ron, I believe you were next.
I've asked this question in the chat, and I understand that there's like confusion about what the enrollment projections are based on. But has anybody at schools who has this information? I know that like early on in the pandemic, particularly at the start of the new school year last year, or for the start of this school year last year in the fall, we saw a drop off in students who enrolled, and those students never enrolled. And I think it was most pronounced at the elementary school at the pre-K 3 level, but I could be wrong, but that was what the reporting said at the time. Are schools where do people have numbers at their individual schools about what that drop off looked like? And does it appear to have any correlation to what the enrollment projections look like? And I know we're all trying to figure out what the enrollment projections are, but I just want to get a sense of even where what that drop off look like for.
Mr. Thompson, that's an excellent question. And this is Burnice Cain from Houston's PTA. And that was a challenging question to get transparent answering to, right? So they gave us the projections. You can go to the mayor site. You can look at all the school systems. All the schools and all their budgets. They're on the same location platform. And you'll see that typically enrollment is the key indicator for what kind of funding there is, and populations are going to change based on the school setup, right? So fifth graders are going to migrate to middle schoolers are going to migrate to high school. So that's like one of the factors. You're going to have that migration, and then you have enrollment for the new population. So the pre-K population coming into the school, and then how many slots are open, and then what happens with the lottery, right? So those are all those kind of factors. And then you've got to look at, okay, what are your staffing needs? Are they going to be the same, or are there going to be some changes due to retirement or other unknown attrition rates, right? Just people changing, getting certifications, getting into new roles. And then in terms of like being able to articulate that is the conversation that no one's had yet that I've been a part of, where someone kind of could identify why there was a drop off outside of saying that enrollment was less. That's been my experience, but others may speak to it differently.
Okay, I guess for
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Oh no, I was gonna say for the Woodson folks, do you all have a sense of where you all, if you all saw a drop off in enrollment, at what grade levels did you see that happen? And I mean, I don't want to try to figure this all out because I guess I'm hearing this is a complicated thing. It's a complicated thing, and I just want to understand if that possibly contributes, because one of the things that, as a person who wants to advocate on behalf of schools, is if we're using numbers based on a moment in time, which is this pandemic, then we are literally choosing to hobble schools. And this whole thing is choosing to hobble schools. But I just want to understand where that drop off happened for your students, particularly at the high school level, and how big was the drop off?
At Woodson, I know like our enrollment is down, especially in 9th grade from what was projected this year. Last year it wasn't. Our 10th grade's a monster. Speaking of a person who teaches 10th grade and has 29-person classes, is big. And there's a lot of them and they show up, which is wonderful, but also big. So I think it is really the 9th grade this year. I'm curious to see if like when we return to in person, if like we'll see them come back to an extent, like, or if they chose other schools and they're not coming back to Woodson. We also didn't see, as much of like the mid-year like additions. There have been some, but like usually we'd see like 2 to 3 a week. And that's certainly not happening, at least in the 10th grade. And 10th grade is usually the heavy grade, like 9th and 10th is when you really see a lot of kids come mid-year, and that has not happened as much.
So Sharona put in the chat, and she has her hand up for people who don't see it in the chat. Woodson specifically lost 9th graders, as Laura confirmed. And students get more funding for 9th grade because schools get more funding for 9th grade because of the 9th grade academy. One of the things that makes it hard is that DCPS isn't using a different projection method this year. It's the same as every other year, which takes into account your previous 3 years. But we all know this year is different than every other year. And so that's going to be difficult for schools. So Woodson, I think Massey said they lost like 18. They were down by 18. They missed their enrollment projection by 18 students. But they started out with a hole of like $900,000. I'm going to be honest, for the life of me, and I'm pretty savvy, can't figure out how they started off with a hole of $900,000 by losing 18 kids. They were kind of stabilized with $600,000, which left them with a hole of $300,000. And then the LSAT did their negotiations around which positions would stay or go based on that $300,000, not the full $900,000. And then I know Massey did a petition to get more money back. And so that cut into that hole a little bit more. But it is a valid question, like how you start out with a hole of $900,000 in the first place. I see Sharona, I don't know if there was anything else other than the chat that you wanted to add to that. And if so, go ahead. And then I'm going to go back to the chat because I saw a different question.
Sure. So to the point of enrollment being or I guess projections being a thing, it definitely is. There is a formula. I'm not exactly sure what the formula is, but I do know they look over, I want to say, a 3-year period as to that movement. But because unfortunately there are so many charters that currently exist, we have new ones coming. It's just hard to know who to expect at schools, and you really don't have an idea of who you're planning for. And then as we're in the pandemic, correct, a lot of families, for whatever reason, whether it's I'm just going to forego, or I can't get through the enrollment process online because I don't know how to upload the documents. I don't have the technology, et cetera. So I do think we lost quite a few families as a result of that. And speaking of enrollment for next school year begins tomorrow. But I think, we just need to, as education councils, have conversations, across school communities and ensure that families do have an understanding, because I see the same people in these meetings all the time, right? But if it's just 5 people who understand this process, I think it's something that we all just need to be talking about, championing, et cetera, about the importance of returning, the importance of, just saying I choose whatever school. So that way, the resources and things like that can be there when the students come. Because unfortunately, as it was mentioned with the mid-year transfers, the funding does not come with the students. Even though there was legislation that was created, it hasn't been enacted yet. So until that happens, we're going to continue to be in this conundrum of trying to, solve for things that we just can't afford to. But as the traditional school system, by right system, we're required to do that.
Thank you, Sharona. I want to go to the chat to make sure I did not overlook anything. So I see a question from Don Trail. Is the funding 1 year or no year funding? I'm going to need some more information on what that means.
Oh, I think I couldn't see who was talking about it. She was talking about sometimes the school funding, and she want to know, does it expire or whatnot. I mean, typically if it's no year funding, as long as it's obligated on books, it can still occur expenses and roll over up to 5 years. But if it's 1 year funding, if it's not obligated on the books within that 1 year, they only got additional 1 year outside of that to use it before it expires. So I was just trying to get clarification. I think she mentioned about the funding and somehow she don't know how the funding work. That's why I wanted to see, was it no year money or 1 year money? Because that really makes a difference in how long the school could carry it over from year to year.
So I think what you're referring to is actually, and what the speaker was referring to is the Emergency Rescue Act funding. So the Emergency Rescue Act funding has not yet been allocated. It is federal money that I would think of it like a block grant. Is the best way to think about it. It is a big block grant that every state will receive, and the state executives actually have a lot of flexibilities for how they use that money. There are certain cutouts, so like I think 20% is reserved for learning loss and something else. But because it's a big block grant, the legislation itself actually says it has to be allocated. I believe the legislative word is allocated in the next 3 years, by 2023, I believe. It does not necessarily, the Department of Ed is going to have to chime in and add some more to that as far as when it actually has to be spent. Because the American Rescue Plan not just was like huge, but was like it was an emergency, right? It is actually it is less specific than other legislation that happens, like when you think about like 21st, people are familiar with like 21st century funds or Title I funds. There are a lot of, and I'm sorry if it gets a little wonky, but there are a lot of provisions that are already, that build on prior legislation. But then there are some things that are completely flexible. So in summary, I would say, think of the money like a block grant. The mayor largely has authority over how that block grant is spent. It is not yet hit school budgets because it is happening outside of our regular budget process. So we will see that money appear later. So I hope that's helpful. I'm sorry, last thing. DCPS has started, and I just know this from sitting on the LSAT. So DCPS has started to give their schools guidance around how they would like that money spent. They would prefer that schools do not hire staff with that money, but that's actually not in the federal legislation. but it is the guidance they've given as a LEA. The rationale behind that is fiscal cliff thinking. So like if you don't have money year over year, you don't want to hire staff with it, but this is not money that has to be spent in 1 year. So there's that. So I apologize if that's a little wonky, but it's, I hope, helpful background. I think Nzinga was next in the chat. And I know you wanted to lift up some of the things that the Ron Brown principal shared.
Hi, everybody. Principal Hunt from Ron Brown wasn't able to join us this evening, but he did contact us, and he wanted to highlight that, you know, as is the case with a lot of schools, Ron Brown's budget was decreased. Their decrease is around 193,000. And as a result, they will be cutting 3 positions. Their primary goal, as is often the case, was to retain all of their instructional staff, and they anticipate that that can happen. But because of the cut, that means that there are areas of growth for their students that they won't, in addition to the 3 non-instructional staff positions that they're going to lose, they will also, that'll affect some of the areas of growth that they were hoping to support their students. And that includes digital learning software, funds for college tours, experimental learning off campus, computer devices for teachers and students, and funds for like celebration and recognition incentive funds. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Nzinga. I'm looking to see if there are any questions in the chat that haven't been answered. I also know like this, the conversation we're having tonight has been heavily DCPS. I do welcome, I know we have some folks on the line who either attend or work at charter schools. So if there are budget thoughts that particularly relate to your LEA, we welcome those too. We don't often, we can't look across and see charters the same way as we do GCPS. So it would be helpful to hear if there's anything that should be on our radar. Masiki has a question. Is there a united message around trying to prevent the cuts in general? I saw the petition, but is there an action we can move forward? That is a great question. So the petition is helpful because it is an easy way actually to capture what schools are going through for 2 reasons. One is because you have a list of people, and I think we're approaching 1,000 people who have signed on to the petition, which is a lot, but it's not really a lot if you think about how many people live in DC. What has been more helpful, I would say, are people who have added to that petition what it means for their schools or like what they're facing. So as some of you know, like the council doesn't have education committee anymore. And at this point, the budget is with the council. Because they don't have an education committee, it's less important if there's like a specific council member to go to, honestly. It's more important that they have staff that are doing their homework for them, because it's the staff that look at the budgets and say, oh, wait a minute, like there's a trend here in like whose budget is cut, or here's an opportunity, here's how we can think about legislation around at-risk funding, or those types of things. And so essentially the petition is an effort to help them do their homework, in both saying like, here, this is the issue and their support from this, but also capturing like what people are saying. Unfortunately, because there is not an education committee, there aren't as many engagements for people around the budget at this point. That's just true. I know tomorrow, Councilmember Mendelson, who I saw someone put in the chat, is opposed, say he wants to hold schools harmless. He's been on the record about that before budget process started. But we've seen that schools are not held harmless. He's having an invite-only hearing tomorrow morning, and he invited at least one representative from all the education councils to testify and say what's happening and what we see across school budgets. Because with this federal funding, it's like a big block grant. There's no process. So we're going to have to work really hard in thinking about like what does it look like to engage the mayor around how she spends that funding when there's no process for it. She really it is completely within her right to allocate it however she wants. And so the petition is a start to push to say like, all right, we want our schools held harmless, both in numbers, which is why we're encouraging people to sign it, but also because we don't have staff that's doing that homework, so that we as volunteers can start to do that homework to better understand and better execute trends. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll go to Ron, because I feel like I'm talking a whole bunch. I'll put it back in I told you, I'll put it back in again, but I'm gonna put it in multiple times because if you join late, you can't see what's in the chat earlier. But what we've done before as the Ed Council is we've leaned pretty hard on just social media campaigns and other campaigns to target council members, but we can only do that once we know what the trends are. So if you think about that year that we looked across and budgets in 7 and 8 got hit really, really hard, that was actually later in the process and the mayor had already released her budget. We don't have her budget yet. She hasn't released it. So we can't say all right, Woodson is losing X amount of teachers. We're trying to prepare and be ready for when she drops it. Once we have that, we can run the numbers. Mary Levy will run the numbers. Others will run the numbers. We'll translate it in plain language so we can tell you what that means. And then we can go after the dollars again. Ron, I'm happy to stop talking.
I wanted to, and I think this is, I was, before you, as you were talking, I'm thinking about another thing, but I wanted to, so I'm going to touch on that. I think to your point about Mary Levy crunching the numbers, I don't know, does the SBOE have staff that crunches the numbers? I mean, I don't want to plug, but this is something that has come up. The SBOE doesn't even have the staff to crunch the numbers, so Mary Levy does it, and she does it partly out of passion to do it. And, we don't have that much. I mean, we actually do have a lot of money to go around, but, that's something to think about in advocacy, that we don't even have an apparatus to allow communities to do this work. And that is outrageous. Allyson Criner-Brown has been pushing, I think, the Board of Ed Council to engage, making sure that they engage with tomorrow's public roundtable. Thank goodness for her. But we are looking at this with blind eyes. But my broader point, I think, to Ebony's and other folks' point about the funding, is that even in other places, my daytime job is mostly in transportation work. The infrastructure and transportation departments, the DDOT and DOEE, don't really know what to do with the money, but they have a lot of flexibility to do this work. And it's different for DDOT and DOE because not to put anybody on the spot or to say anything, but they can come to folks and be like, well, what should we be funding, or where should we be putting these dollars? And they have the flexibility to do that. As of right now, based on what everybody is saying and everything that I'm seeing, DCPS is not doing that. The mayor's office, DCPS leadership has not said, here is what it does not sound like they've gone to principals and say, here's what you can do. And that is a flexibility that is seemingly unique to DCPS. And I would love to hear from some of the charter folks, because it's a different situation when you have an independent LEA and you can have those conversations about where should funds go. Another point, and I'll be quiet, is one thing that I'm concerned about, and I'm thinking about it because I had a conversation with the kind of infrastructure side of government earlier today, and it's this conversation that we act like it's, and we may on paper have a surplus, but the way that the budget people crunch the numbers over a set period of years, we may not be in surplus. We're in deficit in some of the out years, or I think they do it over 5 years. I could be wrong. I'm not that familiar with the budget, but the budget, you know, over 5 years, we're not in the green, we're actually in the red, but that all could change as well because projections fluctuate, as we saw this year, because we're running a surplus this year. But one thing that was clear to me last year working with social direct service organizations is that the mayor came to them first and said, you have to cut your budgets. So I'm a bit worried right now in this conversation, as we said, well, we can use ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3 funds and whatever else came out in the next round and put that into community-based organizations. And I love our community-based organizations, but when we know that the funds for community-based organizations to fund positions that may be working with school fluctuate year to year, are those positions any more secure than if we put these dollars into the schools? And I would much, you know, I know there are a lot of people pushing, let's partner with community-based organizations, but I saw this during the pandemic, and we know, like, you know, we know based on the last economic downturn that social services organizations are the very first that they go to cut funding. And every year, even in the good times, social direct service community-based organizations have to go. So my kind of push is that based on my experience, and I haven't been here as long as some of the leaders in this group have been around, but just in my short time, I have seen this, and it is scary. And I don't want our young people, when we are having this conversation about basic staff, to then have to go through this with money that we could have been using to fund those essential positions, librarians, for instance, in the first place.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I should say, disclaimer, Thompsons are awesome, but we are not related. One of the things I think that's important, I lost my whole train of thought. Oh, this about the SBOE. Could we be helpful? So I'll tell you how we can be helpful, and I'll tell you what's not so much in our capacity to do. I will continue to encourage everywhere I go for people to show up at the state board meetings and say whatever it is that is happening with their schools or with their educational experiences, because we actually do have the capacity as our staff puts together a recap from every meeting and they send it to the council. I didn't know that until I was a state board member and I started seeing those emails. Why is that important? That's important because they're essentially saying, like, 30 people showed up and said their schools don't have enough money. And 20 people showed up and said they really care about outdoor learning. And 5 people showed up and said they want mental health supports. I'm making up stuff, but that is helpful to council members when they're not having regular hearings about education. So even if it's something that we don't have the authority to do, because there's a bunch of stuff we don't have the authority to do, that does not mean we can't be helpful in elevating your issue and kind of like putting it on the record. It's like, officially, this went as a communication from the state board to council member so-and-so or to X, Y, and Z's office. So a lot of you all probably saw what happened with Chioma and her son. Many of us followed up as state board representatives, even though OSSI is not under us. We were like, wait a minute, OSSI, like, we're calling the police on 7-year-olds? Like, that's not right. And it's unfortunate to say, but like, it matters if we are the ones to follow up. So no, we don't have staff that delves really deep into the budgets. We do have staff, though, that are policy analysts. So like, we received a policy brief on what was in, on what like the American Response and Recovery Plan had in it. We receive a policy brief on the OSSI waivers, right? So like, we have somebody that will do that work for us so we can better understand. I'm leaning on the student advocate and the ombudsman to come out and do, and we don't have the date yet, but we'll do a training for ANCs, and we're going to start with ANCs because we're going to try it. This is a pilot to just do some training around like the budget and like how they interact with just different, like who does what in education. Because many people go to their ANC because they're like, oh, you know, I'm having a problem and I don't know who to go to. And it would be great if other community leaders understood more. So things like that we can do, and I think are helpful. But we do not, like, there are many things that we don't control. And so it's not always like, can I make this happen? Like, as far as like, can I fix it myself? But what can we do to like build our own capacity? It's Edwards, and this Samantha.
So I did want to share, as a principal, I'm a Ward 7 resident, but I'm also a principal at Randle Highlands Elementary School. And thinking and listening about the budget and enrollment, coming from a personal space, like that was a big piece for us this year. We didn't necessarily lose positions because they were able to give us some additional funding for a position. So we were able to move that money over. But just thinking about enrollment, that was a piece that we actually had to sit down and really talk with the enrollment office about, because what we found out was that Randle sits in a very peculiar place on Pennsylvania Avenue. So our enrollment fluctuates a lot. Like we can go anytime from 325 students to 360 students. And I've been there for 5 years now. So just think about where we're seated. But when you look at the map for the zoning for our school, like we run a long way through Ward 7, but many of our students are closer to Beers. Many of our students are closer to Boone. So we don't get those students because parents are going to go where the school is closest to their location, which I don't think a lot of people know or had that conversation, because I actually had to have that conversation with my staff for them to be informed as to why we need to actually be able to push and get out and talk about enrollment, because our parents, even though they know that they're slated for Randle, they're going to, maybe go into the lottery and go to the school that's closest to them. So just knowing that piece, that had a lot to do with why enrollments fluctuate at different schools. That conversation is not had in terms of like who's actually creating these zoning lines, because of where the students are located. Like we don't have a lot of students at Randle Highlands. We run up towards 30th Nash Place. Like our students run up that way, and a lot of those are like transition homes. So if they're in those transition homes, we don't know how long they're going to be there. During this pandemic, we probably lost about maybe 12 students we lost. And in our enrollment, it said we lost about 18, I think they said. So with that alone, we lost money. We lost money in the budget, almost 100,000 we lost in our budget just because of those numbers. So just thinking about how they're saying they want us to push enrollment, they also need to realize that they're taking the October 5th count. But I can have 325 kids at October 5th count, but by the end of the school year, I have 367 kids, which I did last year. I had 367 kids sitting in my building, and then they still told us that our numbers were going to be different for the next year when we got our projections. So when they do those numbers, I'm sitting there mad because I'm like, I have 360 kids in my building. You're telling me that I'm only slated to have 320, and you're telling me that these numbers are changing. And you're telling me this also means that my funding is going to be different. So just being very mindful of like, knowing that these conversations that you all are having here are the same conversations that a lot of principals are having too, because we are still in this space of having to lose staff because of what the enrollment is telling us for October the 5th. And we do have an opportunity to petition. They do give us funds. Like there are opportunities for us to be able to get like additional funding, but we still need to still try to push those numbers. But Randle sits in the middle of Beers and Boone. So, sometimes it's like, listen, I'm trying to steal from Peter to pay Paul to get these kids in our school, but we're sitting in a space where they're just not close enough for us to get those students. So it also deals with our location as well.
I really appreciate you elevating that, and what it makes me think of that we need to be mindful about, not just for education, but generally. Like everybody was talking about how our former president was jacking up the census. That matters. The Census Bureau has not met its deadline, and they're not going to be ready to do redistricting. So we'll see what that means. But we also, one of the things that was written in, we hadn't redone school boundaries in 40 years. So we recommended, and I actually sat on the committee that was a long time ago now, almost 10 years ago now, 8 years, 9 years or something, to do school boundaries. The boundaries were all over the place because we had open schools, we had closed schools, we had combined schools. We had done a whole bunch of stuff. And so that will be on the table again. I know Woodson has a hard time too, because it only has one feeder school. So it's something as a Ward 7 community, when we think about the setting our schools up for success structurally, needs to be on our radar, is absolutely that boundary conversation when it comes. Like, yeah, Woodson actually has half a feeder. Correction. Thank you, Laura. Half a feeder, because if you go to Kelly Miller, you have the option to go to Woodson or Eastern. I believe that Samantha was next, and then Masiki, and then I'm going to get back on top of the chat to make sure I didn't miss anyone.
Thank you. I know that this could be one of those things that the answer is, Samantha, go to the State Board of Ed meeting. This just complicates everything even more. But as I've been sitting here, I've been thinking about our self-contained special education classrooms, which we have quite a few of throughout the ward, and how by design they grow over the course of the year. So, you know, students are moving into those rooms. And I think especially with our pre-K rooms, as in my experience, I teach in Ward 1, but in a self-contained pre-K classroom, students were not being identified as quickly. And I think it's because they're at home. And when you're at home, you're not seeing as many people, you're not having as many experiences that are making people think like, hey, maybe we should get this evaluated. So my concern for those classes for next year, for places like Smothers and CW Harris, and honestly, me up in Ward 1, are how are we anticipating that potential huge growth, and how do we make sure our students are getting the support that they need? This is the first year that my classroom hasn't been over enrolled in the last 3 years. I was supposed to have up to 9 kids, had 13. So my concern is, if that's where we were before, where are we going, and how do we make these schools still work best for our students?
So the answer is not just come to the State Board of Ed meeting. You're always welcome to come, and you've come before. A lot of that is really decisions DCPS makes, because sometimes they also move around the programs, which really hurt school enrollments. We've seen that a bunch in previous years. So when they decide that one year somebody has an autistic program and then the next year they don't, that harms schools. I will say that things like that are helpful for us to know. So like Marla is testifying tomorrow, which is serendipitous timing. At that hearing that I mentioned, Mendelson invited the ed councils to, because he wanted to know like what it is that schools are seeing. So I think the answer is that actually needs to, we would take that back. And many of the other things said tonight, but we would take that back in our testimony. And just lifting up and saying like, hey, this is something that hurts schools. And this is a practice that is not helpful, because it really is a executive decision. There's nothing the board can do about that, because it's not a standard policy conversation. But if you come and tell us, we'll say the same thing on your behalf. I want to make sure I go to Masiki.
Hey, thank you so much. I am concerned about the influx of enrollment after schools start to open up. It's not something that is abnormal to the school district in any type of way, especially to the public school system. We often see that the school system will get an influx of kids at some point of the school year. And I'm just wondering, is it about time that we create a united front around the way schools are budgeted around enrollment specifically? I think the pandemic has opened up the idea, or for us to be able to talk about the conversation of like what this looks like in a really different way. And so when these schools get the influx of students back, they're not really going to be able to survive if they've already been in the hole. And I think that's the most crucial part is some schools were already in the hole. They're now going to lose even more money because they're not going to get enrollment. And then the enrollment's going to come in, they're not going to be able to get money to help those kids within a decent enough time. And so we kind of perpetuate this same system over and over and over again. And I know it has different branches to it, ELL classrooms, special ed classrooms, being able to have librarians and nurses inside the school. I'm just wondering, is there a united idea to look at what school districts have a really good model around funding for schools, and how can DC start to perpetuate that model right here in DC specifically, so that way we have less conversations about kids not having money and just ensuring that like schools have the autonomy to put the classes or the courses that they need in their building. It just seems like every year we come back to the formula idea, and like we never just handle that as a case of its own. And I think that's something that we have to start moving toward. So thanks for letting me share.
I appreciate that. Laura, is this directly in response to Masiki? Because if it is, I'm gonna let you jump in, and then I'm going to go to the questions I have in the chat.
Yeah, it was meant to be not as like a response per se, but like an add-on.
On the idea.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm concerned about with like the budget discussions is that DCPS has begun engaging in one about what they call student-based budgeting, which I think is a huge misnomer in my opinion, because they're basically, again, it's all coming from me, but we have very small schools in DCPS on the whole, right? Like our schools are little, and we have a lot of charters that open up, and so our schools they sometimes grow a little bit, they get a little smaller, like, but they hover around these little numbers that the chancellor's openly and repeatedly stated he finds to be unsustainable, which suggests that he's got a plan to close some of them. And we all know whose schools get closed when the chancellor makes plans to close schools. And so student-based budgeting, like it kind of sounds nice, like, oh, it'll be more transparent. You know, we'll be able to really identify kids, and there'll be more like flexibility for schools to spend the money the way they want to, unlike this terrible comprehensive schools model. The problem is for me that they're just not using the comprehensive schools model. The model is not the problem, because the model guarantees a floor of services. Even if your school is hitting teeny tiny numbers, you will always get the money for a principal, and it won't eat up a huge chunk of your budget because principals are rightfully expensive. So like, in student-based budgeting, at least I don't trust DCPS to make it in a way that like wouldn't cause small schools like Woodson and other small schools in Ward 7 who see a slight enrollment decline one year to basically just hemorrhage money and then just permanently start going down this like slippery slope. We already do, but I'm pretty sure like what DCPS is doing is not following its own policies in order to continue to cut our budgets. So like, I do think it's a really important discussion you're bringing up. My concern is that DCPS right now is trying to hijack that kind of discussion to like get themselves even more control over our funds. And frankly, to allow some of the small schools to have reasons to be closed in another round of school closures. And I may sound paranoid, but Chicago's trying to reverse and get to what we're doing. And why would we want to reverse and get to what they're doing? Like, the problem is not the funding models right now. The problem is how they're being implemented.
Thank you, Laura. You don't sound paranoid. I'm going to go to the chat. I'm actually going to take us back a little bit. So Marcia put a good question in the chat around how schools are going to pay for summer learning support. She explicitly said, I would love to hear about how schools pay for summer learning support and what type of programming schools will have to help students catch up. I don't know if we know all the answers to that yet. I will say that from a DCPS standpoint, and there are people on the call who definitely know better than I do, they have convened these, what are we called? Like reopening cores or something? Is that what we're called? Okay, yes, I see Principal Edwards not. There are all these different names for stuff. They have convened groups of community people to think about like how they're going to do this and what they want to spend their money on, both as far as like student acceleration and things like summer. I am going to then I'm going to tell you what my opinion is, which is, I'm prefacing this by saying it is my opinion. It is my opinion that some of that federal money will be spent on things like learning during the summer. That's the kind of stuff they're going to spend it on. So I would assume that would not come out of school budget. That's my assumption. It's my opinion. I feel like it's an informed opinion, but that's what's likely going to happen. I'm going to see if there are any other questions in the chat, and then I'm going to go to, I don't know if Kearney or Marla raised their hands first. Have individual schools had success in advocating for dollars in their budget in addition to the collective advocacy of the Ed Council? I remember as LSAT just being told, we need to figure out how to deal with the amount of cuts. I think that's a question for individual schools. So I don't know if anybody wants to chime in around like successful school-based advocacy after they were, Principal Edwards.
Yes, we have. We've had opportunities where when we petitioned for more money, we were given additional dollars for positions as well. So that has happened. I know for my school that has happened. And in terms of, I know the question about summer planning and different ideas for the summer programming. One of the things they are pushing us, especially in like different cohorts, is like reading recovery. So some of those things will be happening in the summer programs, but also principals have the slight bit of autonomy to be able to be very creative in what their summer programs look like. So for us, like there are going to be quite a few things that Randle Highlands will have to try to support students who we missed during the school year, who did not attend or who still did not show enough progression during this academic school year during virtual. Because virtual was a struggle for some of our scholars. So just knowing that there's going to be some of our students who we want to target, but it's not just our at-risk students. There are some students who are not at risk that we want to make sure that there's a balance between those supports as well.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of times when we come into the process, it's later than the petition. So like, it's actually when the budgets are like finalized and made public. I will say that like I shared earlier, Woodson, they had a successful petition this year as far as getting more funding. It's not perfect. Like they're still, at least a position down. But they were granted more money. And that's something that the principal had to do. Those are internal processes that you kind of only see if you sit on the LSAT. Ideally, schools would never be put in those positions in the first place. But like that, I don't know of anything that is like community-based. A lot of times the processes are, you don't have the information to advocate. Like you sit on the LSAT, that's an advisory role. It's the principal's responsibility to do the petition, take it back, talk with the central office staff, try to like negotiate, finagle some things. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, which is not necessarily, honestly, a reflection of all the work the principal and the LSAT could have put in. Ms. Edwards, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do want to say that sometimes also at schools, and this is coming from someone, I've been at the high school as well as now at elementary school. We also, principals need to be mindful sometimes too of the programs that the initiatives that they have in their school, because they can also get positions that can't carry on the next school year either.
Yeah.
So that can become a tricky situation if you're trying to build a business program in your school, or you're trying to build a woodshop program in your school. Like, you just have to be mindful that sometimes those positions may be the positions that you may look to cut first, because it may not be as sustaining as you want it to be, because it's an initiative that you have. And you may want to look at, and some principals may want to look at like the staffing that they have in the building, so they can monitor some of the cuts that they do have. But some of that could be the fact that like a lot of schools were going into like STEM and STEAM and those type of programs in their schools, but they hire people specifically for those positions. And then when budgets happen, they end up having to cut some of those positions in their schools because they can't sustain that position in the school due to the budget. So those are some areas that I don't think sometimes people who are not in the schools know, that those are things that do happen when they create different positions based off what they're trying to build within the school. Granted, it's a great initiative, but sometimes with the budget, the way it fluctuates in DCPS, you may not always be able to sustain those types of programs in your school. So you have to be very creative in the staffing that you do have in your building, so that those won't be a part of your cuts.
Thank you for that. I want to lift up, since we're talking about summer and other funding, Ron Thompson put in the chat, DOES through the Summer Youth Employment Program is actually paying some kids to attend classes, but he doubts anything is coming out. But I doubt anything is coming out DOES funding to pay for staff during the summer. I don't know how the staffing works, but it is right that DOES is, so like that way, if there's a kid who honestly like needs the money, they don't have to choose between I'm gonna work a summer job or I'm gonna get my credits. You can get your credit, which is an awesome thing. I think this is a good time to plug the petition again. Samantha has volunteered to drop it in the chat every 15 minutes for those who join late. So if you want to sign the petition around fully funding schools, we're going to drop it in the chat again. I'm going to go to Marla next. Kearney, let me know if you are in the queue or not. Marla.
No, I just had 2 points to follow up on. Laura's correct. There's been research on student-based budget. I actually was a principal under a student-based budget. It works if you have a certain number of students. Under that number, it does not work, and DCPS tends to have smaller schools, so it will not guarantee certain positions. So we need to watch that and be careful about that, because we want to make sure that there's a guarantee of a comprehensive staffing model of positions in all our schools. The other thing I wanted to just respond to is Dontrell, when he was talking, I think he was talking about U.S. Grants from the Fed, from the U.S. Department of Ed, which usually gives out 5-year grants, and you can't roll over funds from year to year. But school budgets are about 90% out of local funds, and they're a year-to-year budget. So I just wanted to let everyone know that federal funding does not give the amount of funding that we think it does. It is really de minimis in many ways.
Awesome. Thanks, Marla. Kearney, hand was up.
Yeah, no, thank you. And also Principal Edwards, like I've been like just taking some notes, even from my personal experience with stuff. I'm just like, that's so true, down from signing petitions to trying to figure out what teachers can have multiple roles in a space. So anyway, yeah, so I teach currently, and I know at my school, at Ron Brown, in terms of summer planning, one of the things that we're focused on is making sure that we get a lot of social emotional learning in. There's been a lot of talk about, because we're a college prep school, it's like we need to have the academic piece, but also looking at some of the data that we have with students being burnt out and focusing on mental health. They want to shift a lot of the focus to that area and partner with an organization called Tamani DC. So that's been huge. And I know students did that program also last summer. We have admin premium being used next year to roll out funding for tutoring programs to make sure that we have that for reading comprehension and algebra support. So I think a lot of the academic pieces are going to be during the next year, and some of it is going to be specific to the curriculum of whatever organizations we partner with, as well as the regular summer school programming and a piece of academics, particularly for incoming freshmen, because they've had a virtual learning experience their entire 8th grade year, depending on the school. And then in terms of, there's about $165,000 I know for our school that is being used for planning now for comprehensive programming in the summer. Not really sure where the money is coming from per se, but I do know that that is a part of it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I know Will had his hand up. I don't think I lowered it.
Oh, hey, yeah, I lowered it, but it sounded like everyone is kind of, I was just trying to provide additional insight around the budget assistance request process that's utilized for the schools, and that's how we get additional. Huh?
Is that Mr. Massey?
Yeah, that's me.
Hello, Principal Massey.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm on my personal phone. I'm sorry. But yeah, it sounded like Principal Edwards, went into depth about how schools can request additional funding through the budget assistance process through the district and filing the petitions with the district office. It also sounded like there was a question related to how staffing is funded through the summer. And that is also funded in the lump sum of money that the schools got to fund the first leg of the ESSER funds. And so 20 to 30% of those funds must be allocated to summer acceleration, which is inclusive of your programming, your products, your work products that you're using for students, your supplies, as well as your staffing. So staffing is paid through that funding as well.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I see Ron with his hand up. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So go ahead, Ron.
I want to try to let this be the last thing I say because I realize I've been talking a lot.
Don't worry, it's 8:02, so I'm about to do a last call anyway, so that's right on time.
Amen, amen.
I wanted to just put out there, I know in the BSA for last year, there was the establishment of the co-location fund. Where are those revenues going? Because they are revenues. Secondly, what were we doing with leased charter lease or charter rent that would for those charter organizations leasing space? Where do those revenues go? And I'm not asking a question about co-location specifically, but just the funds. The fund was established in the BSA for last year. What money has been collected and what is on the table? On top of that, unrelated to that, and also the charters who are leasing space, where do those revenues go and can they be direct? I mean, I don't know. Can they be reprogrammed? I don't know. That goes to the general fund. The last point that I just wanted to make about the budget to think about is I know Mary Che has this proposal for like graduate support, basically a DCPS alumni office, which would have been great when I graduated from high school some years ago. Now I'm getting old, but there is the college access program. And what are we doing? What money are we putting on the table to support our college students who graduated in 2020 in the summer, went off to college and had this major disruption? Are we putting any money toward ensuring their success? Because we know, or at least the last set of research that I read, that DCPS students and DC students for public schools in general, particularly Black students, have a hard time completing college on time. So in this conversation about just funding and learning loss and kind of making sure that our kids are doing what, getting back on track, if we can keep that in mind, just what are we doing for our graduates, our first and second year college students as they enter into college and as they matriculate into their second year?
So I agree with Kearney. Co-location convos go until 9 p.m. minimum. I can answer part of your question. It's as far as the budgets, the part that was established in the Budget Support Act last year. That money was designed that if a school locates in your building, it would go to that school. It does not go into like some type of larger pot. That I know, because we looked at that closely. As far as the overall questions around charter leases, I don't have a good answer for you. I just don't. And so I'm not even going to try to make up something to entertain that. I don't know if Mr. Massey is about to jump in and try to answer part of your question.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm done.
It sounded like there was, and if I'm hearing correctly, it sounded like the tail end of the question was around what are districts doing around supporting first and second year college students. And so I wanted to just say that DCPS has entered into a federal grant now where our first and second year college students, schools are able to pair them with mentors that work with the district and in partnership with the district to now help them through their first 2 years of college through mentorships, and making sure that, you know, they have like the technology that they need at school, that they have consultations about their grade, and to continue the academic advising. And so this is the first cohort of students who are part of that cohort. So this first year, students who are in their freshman year of college, their counselors at the school, as well as their college and career coordinators, worked with senior groups to pair students with mentors through this grant. So this is the first year that this is happening. So that's one thing that the district is doing to help support those seniors who are going into college for the first time.
Thank you, Principal Massey. It is 8:07. We typically adjourn this meeting at 8:15. So I want to do a last call for any questions or comments. Then I'm going to turn to announcements. So last call for any questions or comments that relates to school budgets. We'll drop the petition link in the chat one more time. If you have already signed it, send it to somebody else to sign because it's important. And we need as many people as possible. Also encourage people to put in their experiences, like what does this mean for our school? Because that is helpful. We will use a lot of the information that we've gathered before, but also from this meeting tonight to inform our testimony as the Ed Council in front of the council tomorrow, because we have been asked exactly how our school's being impacted by budget cuts.
So Ebony, this is David Redland. How you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
All right. How's everyone doing this evening?
Everyone is on mute.
Good. Good. It makes the answer a lot easier and quicker. So I since put something in the chat box for the Education Council. It is our sense that, and I'll be really quick, that Ward 7 lacks a significant number or amount of facility space for early childhood education. And the mayor has made a lot of commitments to support early child education, but we have not developed the proper facilities in Ward 7 to support that initiative. And we was wondering if the Ed Council would consider putting together a letter of support or a needs assessment on providing that capability, specifically near the location of the DOES and the new DGS, where they just broke ground. We think that the Thrive the Five program that the mayor has espoused and some of her other commitments make that location ripe near the DGS, where city officials will move over there and they will need some sort of childcare capability, as well as DOES, where a lot of people go for employment, but in addition to employment, they need somewhere to take their children. So again, we just wanted to kind of seed the soil with the Education Council and maybe get some support or some momentum behind putting or building out a state-of-the-art childcare facility in that location. Thank you very much.
So that does not count as an announcement. What typically happens is if someone has a request for support, they send it to the board. And so even though the board will change, the emails and everything will be the same, you should submit some information to word7ed@yahoo so that they can make a decision around like, all right, is that something we're gonna put on the agenda? Like how can we give the right amount of time for people to understand that request and engage, and then we will vote on it. So thanks for flagging. Nzinga just put, because Nzinga is a correspondence secretary currently, Nzinga just put in the chat, please send your request to word7ed@yahoo.com, and we're happy happy to talk about what that request looks like.
So again, I apologize for not understanding the protocol. I'm a new member and kind of Neanderthalish, so I will accept it.
No
that
worries.
no,
The
it's
beautiful
a good,
thing about being a education council is that, you know, we're friendly people who like people to learn. So we welcome it and we welcome you. Yeah, so that's the best thing to do, just so we can make sure that we're sharing the right amount of information, and people know like what's being voted on, what's on the agenda, like that type of thing. So happy to have you send that over and follow up. Yeah. So I saw Principal Edwards' hand. I'm going to reiterate, it's 8:12. Last call for any announcements. We typically have a couple of community announcements, and I want to make sure that if people have things that should be on the radar, they have time to share that.
So I just wanted to share really quickly. I don't know how state of the art, but Randle Highlands will, the old Randle Highlands will become the new birth to pre-K school for Ward 7. So we're actually in the process of going through the whole planning stages, and it's supposed to begin, the biggest push is supposed to begin in August. So there will be a birth to pre-K facility for Ward 7 at Randle Highlands.
Yes, we know. And congratulations, because they're going to build out the old building, historic building, whatever they call it. Yeah. Congratulations on that. Ron, I see you with your actual hand.
Very quickly, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is holding a roundtable next week on Thursday, April the 8th at 6 p.m. on surface transportation. So buses, bikes, not trains. I guess that counts as service, but all things that move over ground. She'll be having a roundtable. I'm gonna put her event staff email in the chat for those who want to RSVP. Just as a reminder for people concerned about like school, just your kids being able to walk to and from school. Earmarks have been reintroduced in Congress, so the Congresswoman who doesn't have a vote will be able to submit earmarks, and if she hears from residents about school safety and improving pedestrian safety around schools, she may put that in there. So I encourage folks to go. Again, I want to put her staff's email down in there. RSVP Thursday, April 8th, next week at 6 p.m. You just have to RSVP to get the Zoom link.
Awesome, thank you. Any other announcements? All right, I have an announcement. So maybe two announcements, definitely at least one announcement. One announcement is April 14th, which will be spring break. The state board is having a citywide outdoor learning day. Most people have seen like some people having different events, but we haven't had like anything consistent in Ward 7. So that'll be the first one that I know of that's just like open to the community. If people want to attend, it'll be at Nats Academy. There's a flyer coming and it'll be shared out, but there will be at least one event in every ward. And so more information to come on that. I think Nats Academy said they can host it from 11 to 3 that day. So please bring kids, all ages. It should be good. It'll be social distance. It'll be outside. And we'll have masks and stuff in case people show up without them. ANC 7F has offered to produce food, to provide food people can take away. And Kimball, which is next door, will probably have some staff helping out with some of the activities. So please come when you see the flyer for that. And then of course, like our state board meetings are the third Wednesday of the month. So if you have things, please show up and tell us so we can be on par with you all as far as what you're saying. And I'm sorry, last thing. So there are a couple charter applications in front of the Public Charter School Board. Two of them are, and I'm sorry, I should have said this, totally blanked. Two of them have listed Ward 7 as a potential siting location. One is for I think they're calling themselves like a boutique storefront Montessori type of feel, which is small, very small schools with a Montessori style. And the other one is actually, from my reading of the application, is really focused around SPED students. I did share a letter to the Public Charter School Board, which the Ward 7 Ed Council is supportive of. We shared that out. We'll share it out again. Unlike the council, the Public Charter School Board kind of does the public comment the other way. So like their public comment technically has closed, but the vote is at their April meeting. They will have public comment at the April meeting though, and technically people will still hear you. So we'll share out information about the April meeting if you'd like to share, sign up for public comment. And we always invite people to email the Public Charter School Board members because it would be great if they can hear from more community members. But I want to make sure that's on people's radar, especially when schools are selecting 7 as a location. We didn't have a conversation about that tonight because budget is an emergency. But happy to answer any questions about that at any time. Last thing is 8/17. Ballots are out. Voting will close at 9:30. So if you were sitting here in this meeting like I was and did not vote, you have until 9:30 to vote. We will share out the results when we have them, but please go to your email, vote. Thank you to everyone who has stepped up and said they want to run. Thank you to everyone who has served because it's been awesome. We've had really a great team of folks on the Ed Council. We have great members, and I'm looking forward to continuing to be a member. And so thanks to all the candidates and congratulations to whoever our new board members will be. So it is 8:18. I'm gonna ask for us to adjourn. I guess I should move for us to adjourn. Is there a motion on the floor to adjourn?
I would like to make a motion on the floor to adjourn.
All right, is there a second?
Round of applause though for Ebony Rose Thompson's final meeting as chair after a long and very successful run. It's been a
Rah, rah, rah.
serving with you. Of course, we'll still be
Yeah.
serving with you, but in a different capacity. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not leaving. I'm still gonna come to the meetings, and I'll technically still be on the board, so I won't miss you all so much.
now you can just party in the chat with the rest of us.
Oh, I'm looking forward to
Driving
it.
Marlon.
Oh, you can talk ish in the chat, Ebony. Yes, I'm all for it.
I'm excited about it. All right. I didn't hear a second, so we're technically not adjourned.
Seconding, I was just adding on to my second.
I appreciate it. It has been awesome serving with you all. Yeah, it's been awesome. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be around. And I'm happy to still be a support in any way I know how to be. All right, so with that, we are adjourned. It is 8:19. Make sure you check your emails because if you check it at 9:35, Election Buddy said, no, you can't vote. So please do that. And we'll look forward to being in touch with people via email. Good night.
Deuces, my dear.
Bye, everybody.
Oh, we'll also post the recording. That's coming too. Good night, you all.